He left a $10,000 tip on a $12 bill, and the waitress? She didn't just stand there. She ran after him, straight into the parking lot. Can you even imagine? One ordinary night, one small act of kindness, and a life completely changed. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments right now. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. Tonight, we're stepping into the world of a hardworking waitress whose life was about to be turned upside down, all because of one stranger's incredible generosity. From disbelief to curiosity, from suspense to life-changing revelation. This story is one you'll want to hear from start to finish. So, grab a seat, stay with me, and let's discover what happened that night when a $12 meal became something she, and maybe even you, will never forget. It was just another ordinary evening at Maggie's Diner. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, and the faint aroma of coffee and fried bacon filled the air. Maggie, the waitress, moved from table to table with practiced efficiency, smiling politely, pouring coffee, taking orders. She had been working here for years. Some days, it felt like she was invisible. Other days, well, they were slightly better. Tonight, like most nights, her mind wandered to things that mattered outside these walls. Bills that never stopped arriving, dreams she had quietly tucked away, and the small hope that one day, maybe just maybe, something extraordinary would happen. She didn't know it yet, but tonight would be different. Tonight, a stranger would walk through the door, and something impossible was about to occur. It started as a simple order, a sandwich, some fries, and a cup of coffee. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. But when the stranger, calm, composed, seemingly ordinary, slid a $12 bill across the counter, everything changed. Maggie's eyes went to the tip, and then she froze. $10,000. She blinked. Once, twice. Maybe it was a mistake. She leaned closer. No, the numbers were clear. $10,000, written neatly on a piece of paper barely the size of her hand. Her heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced. Who would do something like this? She whispered, almost to herself. In that moment, the diner felt smaller, the world quieter, and time somehow slowed. Every diner conversation, every clatter of dishes, faded into the background. All she could see was the tip, and the man who had left it. And then instinct took over. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket and ran. Yes, ran. Out the door. Into the parking lot. Into the unknown. What happened next would change her life forever. But before we get there, let's step back and meet the woman behind this incredible story. Because understanding her world, her struggles, makes this moment feel even more extraordinary. Maggie wasn't just any waitress. She was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, favorite drinks, and even the small details most people forgot. A kind word here, a comforting smile there. It was just part of who she was. But behind that polite, practiced smile, her life was far from easy. Bills piled up on her kitchen counter like little towers. Each one a reminder that nothing ever seemed to come easily. Rent, utilities, car repairs, they all added up. And some nights she went to bed wondering how she'd make it through the next month. Yet, despite the struggles, Maggie never let it show to her customers. She had a quiet strength. She had dignity. And she had dreams, small ones maybe, but they were hers. Dreams of traveling, of finally taking a break, of seeing a life outside the constant grind of the diner. Her co-workers often joked that she had a heart bigger than anyone else in the diner. And maybe they were right. She always gave extra care to regular customers, remembered their favorite orders, and sometimes, when she could, left a small gesture of kindness behind. A warm smile, a kind word, or even a tiny freebie for someone who looked like they needed it. Most nights, she returned home tired, yet quietly proud of the small ways she made the world a little brighter. But those nights were usually quiet, sometimes lonely. She lived alone in a small apartment just a few blocks away. Her only company were her thoughts, her old photographs, an occasional call from her mother, reminding her to eat properly or take care of herself. It was a simple life, a modest life, but a life she managed to keep afloat with honesty, hard work, and an unwavering sense of decency. And then that night, as the diner lights buzzed and the coffee machine hissed, a man she had never seen before entered. He didn't rush, didn't glance at his phone, didn't demand attention. He simply walked to a table, sat down, and ordered something small, almost humble. Maggie, like always, smiled and took his order. But even as she handed him the plate, something about him felt different. There was a calm in his eyes, a quiet confidence, and, for reasons she couldn't explain, a sense that whatever was about to happen would be extraordinary. Little did she know, the ordinary life she had built, the carefully measured days of work and small joys were about to collide with a moment she would never forget. And it all began with something as simple, as ordinary as a tip. Maggie carried the man's plate to his table, her movements automatic practiced. She smiled politely, asked if he needed anything else, and stepped back. Then, as he finished his meal, he reached into his wallet and handed her the check. A $12 bill. Nothing unusual. Just another ordinary night at the diner. Maggie picked up the bill, glanced at it, and froze. Her eyes flicked down and then widened. $10,000. She blinked. Slowly. Once. Twice. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she hadn't seen the zeros correctly. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the slip again. No, there it was. Clear, unmistakable, written neatly in bold numbers. $10,000. Her heart pounded, so hard it felt like it might leap out of her chest. Her mind scrambled for an explanation. Was it a prank? Did he leave it by accident? Surely, someone would correct this. Surely. She looked at the man. He sat calmly, sipping his coffee, reading the paper, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. There was no hint of expectation, no gleam of attention-seeking, just ordinary calm. Maggie's thoughts raced. Who would do this? Why me? Her fingers traced the edges of the paper nervously. She felt a mixture of disbelief, fear, and an almost childlike excitement that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The diner seemed to blur around her. The hum of the coffee machine, the clatter of dishes, the chatter of other customers, all faded into the background. There was only her, the tip, and the man. Her knees weakened slightly. She wanted to say something. Anything. Are you serious? She almost whispered, but the words stuck in her throat. For a long moment, she simply stared, unable to comprehend what she was holding. $10,000. On a $12 bill. It made no sense. And yet it was real. And then, without thinking, without hesitation, she did the only thing her heart told her to do. She grabbed her coat, took a deep breath, and ran. Out the diner doors. Into the crisp night air. Into the parking lot. Into the unknown. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her mind raced with questions, disbelief, and inexplicable thrill. Who was this man? Why had he chosen her? And what did it mean for her life, her future, everything she had worked for? All she knew for certain was this. Her ordinary night, her ordinary life, had just been shattered by a single impossible act. And whatever happened next would change everything. Maggie burst out of the diner doors before she even realized what she was doing. The cool night air hit her face, making her gasp as her heart thundered in her chest. Her coat flapped behind her as she ran toward the parking lot, eyes scanning desperately for the man. He was already walking calmly to his car, unhurried, unaware that the ordinary life of a young waitress had just collided with the extraordinary. "Wait," she called, her voice trembling. The words felt small against the vastness of the empty lot. Swallowed by the night, her legs pumped harder. The pavement beneath her feet echoed with urgency. Every step was fueled by disbelief, curiosity, and emotion she couldn't name. Half fear, half hope. She could see him now, just a few feet ahead, leaning against his car. The glow from the streetlights cast long shadows, making the scene feel surreal. It was like the world had slowed down, every detail amplified. The hum of the tires on asphalt, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant sounds of the diner fading behind her. "Sir, please wait," she shouted again, this time louder. Her voice carried a mixture of panic and determination. He turned slightly, just enough to meet her gaze. There was a calmness in his eyes that made her chest tighten. He wasn't startled. He didn't run. He just watched her approach, as if he knew this moment would come, as if he had been waiting for it too. Maggie's breaths came in quick, uneven gasps. I don't understand this tip. It's why. Her hands trembled as she reached out toward him. Her mind raced. Try to make sense of the impossible. $10,000 on a $12 bill. How could anyone be this generous? Why now? Why her? The man smiled softly, a small, unassuming smile that somehow made her heart sink and swell at the same time. It was a smile that promised no judgment, no catch, just understanding. Maggie slowed, her chest heaving, unsure whether she wanted to run forward or freeze in disbelief. Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper she had grabbed from the diner, proof that this was real. Every instinct screamed at her to ask questions, to demand answers, to understand. But the words stuck in her throat. She realized that this moment wasn't just about money. It was about trust. It was about humanity. And yet, she couldn't help herself. She took a step closer, and then another. Her shadow stretched across the parking lot, merging with his. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what this act of kindness would mean, not just for the night, but for her life from this moment forward. He held the door open, gesturing for her to speak. His calmness contrasted sharply with her racing pulse. The tension was thick, almost tangible, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. And in that silence, in that brief, heart-stopping moment, she understood something profound. This was not just a tip. This was a story that would change her forever. Maggie finally reached him, stopping just a few feet away. Her chest heaved, her fingers still gripping the edge of the $10,000 tip, trembling from adrenaline and disbelief. Wait, I don't understand, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of every emotion swirling inside her. Confusion, awe, disbelief, and a strange, budding hope all tangled together. The man looked at her calmly, as if he had been expecting this. His eyes were kind, steady, and unjudging. You don't need to understand, he said softly. I just wanted to do something, right? Maggie blinked, trying to process his words. Right? But $10,000 on a $12 meal? Why? Why me? He shrugged, a small, almost apologetic smile tugging at his lips. Sometimes people need a reminder that kindness exists, that generosity exists, and sometimes we get to be the ones to give it. Her mind raced. She thought of her mounting bills, her struggles, the tiny dreams she had tucked away for so long. The money, it could change everything. But more than that, his words, they felt heavier than any amount of cash. They felt personal, meaningful. I don't even know what to say, she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. I mean, I've never had anything like this happen before. You don't need to say anything, he replied gently. Just take it, and promise me you'll use it for something that matters to you. Not just for bills, not just for survival, but for something that makes your life brighter. Maggie's hands shook as she held the tip. The paper suddenly felt heavier than it had in the diner, heavier with purpose, heavier with responsibility. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I promise. I don't know how, but I'll make it count. The man nodded, satisfied. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a connection born from a simple act of generosity, yet deeper than either could fully explain. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The night air was crisp, the parking lot quiet, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Maggie realized she had expected something more complicated, something transactional, but it wasn't that. It was simpler and somehow more profound. Thank you, she said softly, finally allowed herself to meet his gaze fully. For everything. He gave her a small smile, nodded, and opened the car door. Take care of yourself, he said, before sliding into the driver's seat and driving away, leaving her standing there, clutching the slip of paper that had changed her life. Maggie watched him go, Her mind a whirlwind of disbelief, gratitude, and wonder. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration, as if she had just lived through something extraordinary, a moment so rare, so unexpected, that it would stay with her forever. And in that moment, she understood the truth of his gesture. Kindness, when given without expectation, had the power to transform not just a night, but a life. After he drove away, Maggie stood in the quiet parking lot, still holding the slip of paper. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and wonder. Who was he, really? Why had he chosen her? To understand, she would have needed to see the life that had shaped him, the life that had led to this single, extraordinary act of generosity. He hadn't always been this calm, this composed, this confident in small kindnesses. Years ago, he had known hardship in ways that left marks no one could see. Nights spent wondering if he would ever make ends meet. Moments of loss that cut deeper than words could describe. There was a time when he had sat at a diner much like Maggie's, staring at a tiny meal in front of him, wondering how he would pay the next month's rent, or even the next week's bills. He had known hunger, uncertainty, and the ache of wanting to help others when he could barely help himself. But life had a way of teaching lessons in unexpected ways. Over time, he built himself back up slowly, quietly, with patience, hard work, and a steadfast belief that he could make a difference, not just for himself, but for others. And along the way, he realized something profound. It wasn't enough to succeed quietly in one's own life. The real measure of a person wasn't in what they accumulated, but in what they gave without expectation. A kind word, a helping hand, a life-changing tip left on a small meal. It was all part of the same truth. He had made mistakes, yes, missteps that haunted him for years. But he had also made choices that mattered, choices that taught him the quiet power of generosity. And that knowledge had stayed with him, shaping every decision, every interaction, until one night, in one ordinary diner, it found its way into Maggie's hands. This was why he left the tip. Not for recognition, not for thanks, not for attention, but because he had once been the person who needed it, because he understood what it could mean. And perhaps in a small, unseen way, he hoped it would ripple outward, changing not just Maggie's night or her life, but the lives of everyone she touched after that moment. It was a quiet, profound lesson in humanity. Kindness was not a fleeting gesture, but a seed planted in a world too often starved for compassion. And for Maggie, standing in that parking lot, still clutching the paper that seemed impossibly real, the truth was slowly sinking in. This wasn't just about money. This was about connection, about understanding, about one person reaching out to another in a way that could never be measured by dollars alone. After the man drove away, Maggie slowly walked back into the diner. The door clicked behind her, and for a moment, the familiar buzz of the fluorescent lights and the low hum of conversation felt different. Everything felt different. She sank into a chair at the counter, still gripping the slip of paper as if it were fragile, as if it might disappear as she let go. Her hand shook slightly, and her chest heaved with a mixture of exhaustion, exhilaration, and disbelief. Maggie couldn't stop replaying the scene in her mind. The calm way he had spoken, the soft, unassuming smile, the quiet insistence that she used the tip for something meaningful. Each memory pressed against her heart, refusing to let her forget. For years, she had been surviving, not living. Each day had blurred into the next, working, saving, paying bills, getting by. She had learned to keep her head down, to carry the weight of life with quiet perseverance, and to expect little more than routine and struggle. And now everything had shifted in a single impossible moment. $10,000 on a $12 meal. But it wasn't the money that held her attention. It was the gesture, the thought behind it, the reminder that someone she didn't even know, had believed in her enough to make a difference. Maggie thought of her life at home, the small apartment she had grown used to, the bills stacked neatly on the counter, the quiet dinner she ate alone. She imagined what this money could do, and for a moment, a smile crept across her face, not just because of what it could buy, but because of what it represented. Possibility, hope, a chance to breathe. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the weight of it all. The relief, the gratitude, The overwhelming realization that kindness could arrive when you least expected it, changing not just your circumstances, but the way you saw the world. And yet, with the joy came a strange, new responsibility. She had to be careful. She had to honor this gift in the right way. It wasn't just money. It was trust. A trust she didn't take lightly. The man hadn't asked for anything in return, but that made it feel heavier, more important. How she spent it, what she did with it, it mattered. Her mind drifted to her coworkers, her family, the friends who had watched her struggle quietly. She imagined the look on her mother's face, the way her friends might react. They would be shocked, amazed, but they wouldn't understand the deeper truth. This wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was kindness. Pure, simple, and unexplainable. Maggie leaned back in her chair, staring at the tip once more. Her thoughts wandered to the stranger. What had his life been like? Why had he chosen this moment, this person, this diner? She realized that, in a way, she had glimpsed something rare, a life that had been shaped by generosity and hardship, and had chosen to pay it forward. Tears pricked at her eyes, unbidden, and she didn't try to stop them. She allowed herself to feel every ounce of awe, every pang of gratitude, every tremor of disbelief. For years, she'd been small in her own life, moving quietly, unnoticed. But tonight, she felt large, seen, remembered. She imagined her life from this moment forward. The possibilities stretched before her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maybe she could finally take that course she had been dreaming of. Maybe she could help her mother with that small home, repairs she had been postponing. Maybe she could finally breathe for the first time in years. And in that reflection, she understood something essential. It wasn't just about what the tip could buy. It was about what it had done to her spirit. It had reminded her that even in the ordinary, even in the mundane, extraordinary things could happen. That even one act of kindness could ripple outward, changing not just a life, but the person living it. She tucked the slip of paper safely into her coat pocket, feeling a sense of calm determination. She would honor this gift. She would use it wisely. But more importantly, she would carry the memory of it with her, letting it guide her choices, letting it remind her the quiet power of generosity and the way a single person could, without expectation, touch another's life forever. Maggie finally rose from the chair, moving back into the rhythm of the diner. But she was different now. She carried with her a new awareness, a new hope, a new sense of purpose. And though life would continue to challenge her, she knew one undeniable truth. Kindness existed. It could arrive in the smallest, most unexpected ways. And when it did, it could change everything. The next morning, Maggie woke with a strange sense of lightness. The slip of paper still rested in her coat pocket, a quiet reminder of the night that had changed everything. As she brewed her coffee, the ordinary hum of her small apartment felt different. It was as if the world itself had shifted slightly, tilting toward possibility. At work, whispers followed her wherever she went. Her co-workers noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. Her smile lingered a little longer. Her steps carried a newfound confidence. "Something happened last night?" someone asked casually, but Maggie just shook her head, smiling mysteriously. Some things, she thought, didn't need to be explained. Word began to spread outside the diner too. Customers who had been there the previous night returned, curious and slightly in awe. One regular remarked on how radiant she looked, as if the morning sun had chosen her specifically. Maggie laughed softly, brushing it off, though inside she knew the truth. She had been touched by something extraordinary. The story didn't stay small for long. News traveled fast, as it always does in a tight-knit town. Someone had noticed a tip, shared on social media, and soon enough, people were calling the diner, asking to hear the story firsthand. Maggie felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. Pride that her life had intersected with something remarkable, discomfort at the attention it brought. But the ripple of that single act went further than gossip or curiosity. It began to inspire. Friends reached out with small gestures of their own, offering help with her bills, sending warm messages, or simply checking to ask how she was doing. Even strangers, touched by the tale online, shared stories of their own kindness, of times they had given or received unexpected help. Maggie began to notice the effect in subtle ways. A regular customer, struggling quietly, finally smiled at her instead of scowling over the morning paper. Another, who had always complained about everything, offered a tip larger than usual, saying simply, "I just wanted to do something good today." She realized slowly that the man's gesture hadn't just changed her life. It had created a chain reaction, a ripple of kindness moving quietly through the town. One small act had inspired others to believe in generosity, to act without expectation, and to see the humanity in one another. Even within herself, Maggie felt the shift. She began to take small risks, helping someone who looked lost, giving her time to a customer who needed to talk, offering a meal to someone who could barely pay for it. Each act felt connected to that $10,000 tip. Each small gesture a way of honoring the stranger who had believed in her so profoundly. And as she moved through her days, Maggie understood a deeper truth. Life would be transformed not just by grand gestures, but by the quiet decision to give and believe in the good in others. One act of kindness had opened a door, and she had stepped through it, allowing the world to feel larger, warmer, and infinitely more possible. By the end of the week, the diner was buzzing, not just with the usual clatter of plates and coffee cups, but with a sense of energy, of hope, of possibility. Maggie had become more than a waitress. She had become a living reminder that generosity could change lives. And in the back of her mind, she often wondered about the man who had set it all in motion. Who was he really? Why had he chosen her? She didn't have the answers yet, but she had something just as important. The proof that a single, selfless act could ripple outward, touching people in ways that could never be predicted, changing lives quietly, invisibly, beautifully. And in that quiet ripple, Maggie realized she had finally found something she'd been longing for all her life. Hope, connection, and the knowledge that even the smallest moments, when fueled by kindness, could grow into something extraordinary. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that extraordinary night never faded from Maggie's mind. Every time she glanced at the slip of paper tucked safely in her coat pocket, she felt a quiet awe, a mix of disbelief, gratitude, and reverence. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol, a reminder that the world still held moments of pure, unselfish kindness. She thought back to the man, the stranger who had changed her life in the span of a single evening. He hadn't demanded thanks. He hadn't asked for recognition, and he hadn't expected anything in return. He had simply acted because he understood, in a way Maggie was only beginning to grasp, that generosity had the power to ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Maggie realized that the tip, the chase, the conversation in the parking lot, it had all been more than a story of money. It had been a lesson in humanity, a lesson in what it meant to trust, to believe, and to let kindness enter your life without suspicion or hesitation. She thought about her own life, the struggles she had carried silently for so long, the bills, the long shifts, the lonely evenings, and she understood that while the money would help, it was the act itself that mattered most. It had opened her eyes to the truth that even one moment of selfless generosity could change a person, not just materially, but emotionally, spiritually, fundamentally. Maggie began to see the world differently. She noticed the small acts of kindness around her. The barista who remembered a regular's favorite drink, the neighbor who shoveled the snow without being asked, the child who offered a handmade card to brighten someone's day. She realized that these little ripples, when multiplied, created waves that could carry hope and warmth to people who needed it most. And she carried that lesson into her own actions. She helped quietly when she could, gave without expectation, and reminded herself daily that kindness was never wasted. Every smile she offered, every gentle word, every small gesture mattered, just as that one man's generosity had mattered to her. In quiet moments, Maggie sometimes imagined him, somewhere out there, living his life with the same quiet strength and compassion that had defined a night she would never forget. She wondered if he understood the impact of what he had done, not just for her, but for everyone she touched afterward. She hoped he did. For Maggie, the story of that night became a guiding light, a reminder that even in the ordinary, even in the routines of daily life, extraordinary moments could arrive, that a single act of kindness, given without expectation, could change everything. And she knew with a clarity that settled deep into her heart, that the moral of the story wasn't about money or fame or recognition. It was about humanity, about believing in the good in others, even when it seemed scarce, about giving, trusting, and allowing oneself to be moved by generosity, both received and shared. Because sometimes one simple act can set off a chain reaction. Sometimes it can transform a life or a community or even the way a person sees the world. And sometimes it can remind us of something we all need to remember, that kindness, pure and unselfish, still exists. And when it touches us, we are never the same again. Maggie tucked the slip of paper back into her pocket, a quiet smile on her face. She didn't need to see the man again. She didn't need answers. She had experienced something rare, beautiful, and life-changing, and she carried it with her always. A small, unassuming reminder that the world, despite its hardships, still had moments of magic. And in that, she found peace. She found hope. She found herself. Because in the end, it wasn't the tip that mattered. It was the kindness behind it. And there you have it. One small act of kindness, one $10,000 tip on a $12 bill, completely changing the life of a hardworking waitress. It's a story that reminds us all kindness matters. Even the smallest gestures can ripple out, touching lives in ways we might never fully understand. If this story moved you, inspired you, or just made you believe a little more in the good in people, don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV. Hit the like button, share this video, and drop a comment below telling us which part touched you the most. Because here on Heartfelt Tales TV, we share stories that warm the heart, inspire hope, and remind us that humanity is alive in the most unexpected ways. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes one small act can change everything.